Esto no.
Tadi di sini tadi.
And
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seat. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to call the meeting to order. Please be seated. Please take a seat. Distinguished delegates, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. On behalf of the co-president and the respective chairs and co-chairs, it gives me great pleasure to offer you all a warm welcome to this joint opening plenary meeting of the SBSTA, the SBI, and the working group. Since we last met in person, the world has been disrupted and distorted by the harrowing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are making progress, but the fight is far from over, and we continue to hope for better times. Distinguished delegates, the government of the in a virtual format from 11th to 15th October 2021, with a limited on-site presence in Kunming. The second part of COP15 will reconvene in face-to-face meeting in Kunming later this year to deliver an opening statement on behalf of His Excellency, Mr. Heng Runqiu, Minister of Ecology and the Environment, the People's Republic of China, and the President of COP15. Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as the representative of the President of the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the second part of the 24th meeting of subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice. The third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, and the third meeting of the ad hoc working group on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. I wish to extend a warm welcome to you all. I cannot overemphasize the importance of these meetings. We have come together to '15 will indeed make history with the adoption of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which set forth a pathway for all advance our preparation Kunming. COP15 of the post-2020 global biodiversity for action to address the biodiversity crisis and to achieve our 2050. It will make our build our shared future for all life on Earth. The theme of COP15, ecological civilization, building a shared future for all life on Earth, sends a signal to the world that humans and nature belong to a community with a shared future. It reminds us that nature is essential for life, rather than something that can be exploited without restraint. It reminds us that humankind must respect and protect nature, ensure its use is sustainable, and the benefits are shared fairly and equitably. The first part of COP15 set us on a promising course. It signaled renewed political energy to boost ambition, enhance collaboration, synergies across multilateral agreements, and strengthen global biodiversity governance. Ministers adopted the Kunming Declaration, committing to develop, adopt, and implement an effective post-2020 global biodiversity framework that includes provisions of the necessary means of implementation in line with the Convention and appropriate mechanisms for monitoring, reporting, and review to reverse the current loss of biodiversity and to ensure that biodiversity is put on a path to recovery by 2030 at the latest, towards the full realization of the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. President Xi Jinping announced the establishment of the Kunming Biodiversity Fund to help implement the new framework in developing countries. The first part of COP15 also saw many commitments by ministers and by civil society, business, and the finance sector, giving important momentum to the negotiation and the subsequent implementation of the framework. Distinguished delegates, in the coming days, we will work together to deliver on the Kunming Declaration and help construct a global ecological civilization that conserves and protects biodiversity to achieve sustainable development. Together, we will prove that Geneva's reputation as a global center for multilateralism and diplomacy is well deserved. May I take this opportunity to sincerely thank the people and the government of Switzerland for welcoming us all here. I also encourage you to draw inspirations from the recently concluded meeting of the United Nations Environmental Assembly, which approved a number of important resolutions. We have a broad and ambitious agenda, but I'm confident that under guidance from the chairs, co-chairs, and the bureaus, we will, and with the support of the Secretariat, and in the spirit of solidarity, cooperation, and multilateralism with the United Nations at center, we can carry forward the important work of the Convention and its protocols, and help the international community enhance cooperation and build consensus on the necessary transition to bend the curve of biodiversity loss and place biodiversity on the path to recovery by 2030. I look forward to hearing your productive interactions and inspiring discussions, and to welcoming you in Kunming later this year. I thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear delegates. Colleagues, as you know, the government of Switzerland has generously helped us convene our meetings here in Geneva, which will help us continue our progress towards COP15. We would like now to invite Ambassador Franz Paris to address the meeting. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, Executive Secretary, chairs and co-chairs, distinguished delegates and dear colleagues. On behalf of the Government of Switzerland, I would like to welcome you all here in Geneva. Let me first express our deepest appreciation for the leadership that the Secretary and the Presidency have shown over the last 2 years, but also for the engagement of all and each of you, dear colleagues, despite the difficult situation. After an interruption of 2 years due to the pandemic, we finally can gather again in the same room face to face. We are so glad that we can meet, work, think and be creative together here in Geneva. We still have to respect some sanitary rules, and it wasn't always easy for the CBD Secretariat, for the Presidency and the Bureau and the Swiss government and for all of us and involved in preparing this session. But we are here now, ready to start the final phase of the negotiations towards a global biodiversity. Working together in very difficult situations. Switzerland is deeply concerned about the situation in Ukraine, about the humanitarian situation, the human suffering, and widespread damage, including ongoing environmental degradation. Our thoughts and our hearts are with the innocent victims and their families. Switzerland strongly believes that problems have to be solved together and by fully respecting international law and the Charter of the United Nations. This is also the reason why we believe in multilateralism and in our work here in Geneva. The adoption of an ambitious framework is of high priority of Switzerland and of each of us. This is why we are pleased to support these meetings here in Geneva. Our work over the next 2.5 weeks will be of critical importance to advance on the road to Kunming. We have 17 days and nights before us here in Geneva. This is a lot of time. Time enough to achieve the seemingly impossible, to find preparatory work for the successful COP15 later this year in Kunming. This needs both leadership by the chairs and the colleagues and constructive engagement and trust by us, the negotiators. We can offer you a view here in Geneva, sanitary measures needed to ensure our safety, but the most important element, the constructive, solution-oriented engagement and commitment, has to come from each of us. The focus of each of us should not be on what we can get out of the global biodiversity framework and its enabling conditions, but on how we can contribute to it in our best interest and in the interest of all of us, the whole planet, including all life on Earth, to protect and sustainably use biodiversity. Let us agree on goals and targets that each party will contribute to implement, because it is in its own best interest to stop and reverse biodiversity loss. Geneva, with its impressive water fountain, the Jet d'Or, should inspire us to have high ambition, but also to be ready for ambitious compromises for the benefit of all of us. Let us use the time here in Geneva to work together and complete all the agenda items of SBSTA and SBI and formally adopt all the L documents. Let's seize the opportunity to prepare the ground for the adoption of an ambitious, effective, comprehensive and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which will provide guidance not only to the CBD, but to the whole biodiversity cluster and all biodiversity-related and relevant MEAs. Switzerland looks forward to productive and successful negotiations this year in Cologne. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Paris, for providing a warm welcome to delegates and for hosting these important resumed sessions. We look forward to your continued support throughout the post-2020 process. Now we would like to invite the Executive Secretary, Ms. Elizabeth Morima, to address the meeting. You have the floor, Ms. Morima. Ms. Morima.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the resumed sessions of the 24th meeting of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice, the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, and the third meeting of the ad hoc working group on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Today, we gather as a global community to continue our journey towards the second part of the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties and the adoption of the robust, ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Let me first commend our President China, through you, Madam Zago May, to His Excellency, Mr. Wang Roch, Minister of Ecology and Environment of China, for the successful hosting of the first part of the Conference of the Parties 15, which we saw the establishment of the Biodiversity Fund and an overwhelming expression of support and commitment by the heads of state and government for your outstanding leadership in preparing for these meetings. Equally, I offer my sincere thanks and admiration to the chairs of the subsidiary bodies, Mr. Ezequiel Benitez of Mexico, and our chair of SBSTA, and Ms. Charlotte Sokis of Sweden, and our chair of the subsidiary body of implementation, along the co-chairs of the working group, Mr. Francis Oval of Uganda and Mr. Basil Van Havre of Canada. You have faced countless new challenges during your time as chairs. Nonetheless, you have exceeded our expectations, and thus I commend you for your persistence and visionary leadership. To the government of Switzerland, our sincere thanks for the generously supporting these 3 meetings. Geneva provides us with the perfect setting for our discussions, as it is the home of many of the world's most important institutions for health, international trade, development, human rights, as well as multilateral environmental agreements, all of which are key dimensions of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Consequently, Geneva will offer us a daily reminder to strive for a framework that utilizes the whole of government and all sectors of the economy. I would welcome to active engagement in the meetings. I've already the Secretariat in coordination with the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity for supporting their presence of these representatives with us in these meetings in the coming days. Again, our sincere thanks for the generous contributions received from 6 governments, namely Australia, Germany, New Zealand, Norway, Slovakia, and Sweden. Distinguished delegates, I would also like to take a moment to say a few words about the loss of our colleague, dear colleague at the Secretariat. Those of us who have been involved in the meetings of multilateral organizations like ours know very well that our recommendations and decisions reflect the many hours spent in the rooms such as this, discussing and debating each and every word and turn of phrase. But we seldom think about those behind the scenes who spend their days and often their nights ensuring that our closely negotiated compromises result in a clear, correct, consistent, and coherent text. This was the life of our colleague Orestes Plasencia, who held the position of the editor at the Secretariat since 2014. Orestes left us suddenly on 5th January of this year. Orestes was a kind and good, humored colleague whom we all miss. Please join me in a moment of silence to remember him and honor his life. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, the road to this meeting has been long and challenging, but together you have laid a solid foundation for our work. The Kunming Declaration provides us with a clear political direction, with a commitment to negotiate a post-2020 global biodiversity framework that can effectively bend the curve of biodiversity loss and is accompanied by the necessary resources and an effective mechanism for monitoring and reviewing its progress. Ministers have also underscored many of the key elements, such as mainstreaming, redirection of subsidies, rule of law, and full and effective participation of all stakeholders, including the youth, women, indigenous peoples and local communities, business, financial institutions, NGOs, private sectors, etc., that must form part of the universal, ambitious, realistic, action-oriented, and accountable global plan for biodiversity that will bring together the world leaders in Kunming, China, later this year. To guarantee that Kunming will deliver a truly historical agreement, we will need to be open and make clear certain progress here in Geneva. The science subsidiary body and implementation subsidiary body make their best effort to complete their work on key contributions to the framework, and the working group must continue to advance the text of the framework as much as possible. Such progress will allow us to arrive with confidence at the second part of the Conference of the Parties and related meetings of the parties to the Cartagena and Nagoya protocols, as well as build momentum of early deployment at home by sending a strong political signals of our aim to begin swift implementation, collaborate across borders, and get the job done within this decade. The world and us all are clearly eager for an urgent action to protect nature and to transform our unsustainable relationship with nature. The Glasgow Climate Pact at COP26 last year underlined the role of nature in mitigating the impacts of climate change and warming climate, while also helping ecosystems and communities to adapt and build resilience. The United Nations Environment Assembly, at its second part of the assembly, held recently in Nairobi, took bold decision and endorsed a historic resolution to end plastic pollution and forge an international legally binding treaty or agreement by 2014, which will address the full cycle of plastics, including its production, design, and disposal. As ministers highlighted last year in Kunming, China, we have no time to waste. The Global Environmental Facility, in partnership with UNEP and UNDP, is already taking action to fast-track support to governments to prepare for the rapid implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and China is developing modalities for the Kunming Biodiversity Fund. A number of developed countries have already committed to double their funding for biodiversity. I commend all these initiatives, as well as those under the Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming Action Agenda, and call upon all actors to both strengthen and act upon their commitments. We will be working in the shadow of a global pandemic and military conflicts. These are acute threats to peace and human well-being. At this time, I would like to recall and refer you to the statement made by our United Nations Secretary General. Mr. Guterres, to the UN General Assembly on 23rd of February, just last month, whereby he made it clear that any unilateral measures conflict directly with the United Nations Charter. And he appealed to the countries to stop the military operation. The UN Secretary General is fully committed to support all efforts to resolve both these and other crises peacefully. Ladies and gentlemen, these are heavy times. But let me remind us that almost 50 years ago, the world's governments came together at Stockholm, Sweden, and agreed on principles that guide us even today in our work to protect nature and human well-being. Let us continue that energy and commitment and demonstrate through your actions the power of international cooperation and multilateralism. With the support of the Secretariat and the guidance of the subsidiary bodies chairs, together with the working group co-chairs and the bureaus, we can collectively work together to achieve our common vision. Together with the force of my Secretariat team, we are all here to support you and your work. And in this regard, we wish you all a success in your deliberations in the coming days. And as one wise person had once said, coming together is the beginning. Keeping together is progress, and working together is success. All the best to you all. Thank you.
I like that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marema, for your words of welcome and for outlining the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. We look forward to your continued support in facilitating this meeting and the advancement of the post-2020 process. We would also like to reiterate our thanks to you and your team for your hard work in preparing for this meeting. Distinguished delegates, in a moment, we will hear opening statements covering the three bodies from regional groups, followed by major stakeholder groups. Before doing so, I will invite the Secretariat to describe the use of microphones, also to provide us some general information on the logistical arrangement. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and good morning, distinguished delegates. Indeed, very good to be all together this morning. As mentioned by Ambassador Peris, the Secretariat has been working with the host country and the venue to put in place measures to reduce the risk of COVID-19 infection. As you know, all in-person delegates are required to be vaccinated and to self-administer a rapid antigen test each morning before proceeding to the venue. A negative test result must be shown to gain access to the venue. Anyone who tests positive should inform the Secretariat at the email address covid@cbd.int, and they will be required to self-isolate for 5 days and can return after a negative test after that period. Unfortunately, our dear SBI chair, Charlotte Solquist, tested positive, and this is why Gabriela Obermeier is sitting in her place on the podium. But we will have Charlotte joining us virtually in the SBI plenary this afternoon. Inside the venue, delegates are required to wear face masks at all times, except when directly addressing the meeting or when eating or drinking in the restaurant areas. We have also endeavored to provide for social distancing and to avoid overcrowding in the meeting rooms. Accordingly, as you know, the total number of delegates allowed in the venue at any one time is limited. And for these reasons, the green and yellow secondary access passes are required, in addition to the conference badge. Both give access to the venue, but the green pass is needed to access this plenary hall when the plenary is in session, and also to access the contact group under the working group, the post-2020 working group. The proceedings from this room are also being relayed in Hall D. We will also seek your cooperation to avoid overcrowding in the contact groups under SBI and SBSTTA. In both this plenary room and Hall D, please take your assigned places. Please note, however, that seating in Hall D is organized by region. Please, could you also note that no food or drinks are permitted in the meeting rooms except for sealable water bottles. The proceedings of all plenary and contact group sessions can also be followed online using the Interactio platform in viewer mode by all registered delegates. Access is provided via the meeting calendar using the credentials provided with your priority pass. We are aware that there's been some difficulties with the online platform this morning, the quality of the sound, and we are resolving these issues. Rooms are also reserved for daily regional meetings between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. And at this time, parties can also join these meetings remotely on Interactio through the meeting's calendar. The registration system has been configured to ensure that delegates' login credentials will connect to the correct meeting. For a very small number of parties for which travel of representatives to Geneva was not possible because of travel restrictions, full interactive virtual participation will be enabled following a special request to the Secretariat. Those participants have been contacted directly to facilitate their participation. But please note, parties cannot simultaneously be having speakers in the room and speakers online. Now, turning to the use of microphones here in the room. When the chair opens the floor for interventions, if you wish to speak, please press the button in front of you only once, and we will be notified of your request. When the chair gives you the floor, the light on your microphone will turn red. Then please start speaking when the light comes on. Please remove your earphone and speak closely to the microphone, slowly and clearly, so that those online can also follow, and so that our dedicated team of interpreters can provide a clear translation. Some observer delegates who request the floor may not be identified by their organization name. In these cases, when your microphone is on, please be sure to identify yourselves. Statements on each agenda item from parties and observers will be limited to 5 minutes for regional groups and 3 minutes for individual parties, and 3 minutes for major groups and 2 minutes for observers, as time allows. While the time for statements is limited and a clock is provided for you on screen to help you manage your time, please do not speed up your reading. Rather, when speaking, please pause between sentences to make it easier for the interpreters and all delegates to follow you. For statements made in plenary, delegates are requested to upload their statements using the online application on the meetings page. This greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters. And therefore, we request that you do so in advance of delivery where possible, noting, however, that the statements will be posted publicly on the website only after delivery. In any case, please make sure that statements are posted on the same day that the statements were made. Please be sure to include the name of your country or organization and the agenda item on the first page of the document that is uploaded. The uploading instructions are included in your Priority Pass email, along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the page. You can also use the code on your meeting badge. We also encourage parties and observers to make use of the display table, the virtual display table, to share publications, information, materials, and events that relate to the issues being addressed by the meetings. To consult these materials and for information on how to submit them, click on the tab Virtual Display Table on the web portal. Finally, distinguished delegates, the Secretariat issued a few days ago a notification drawing the attention of all of us to a code of conduct issued by the United Nations with a view to making UN events places that are free from harassment of any form. As we resume our physical meetings after such a long break, let us all ensure that these events are places where these issues of global importance are discussed and negotiated in a respectful manner. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now open the floor for statements from regional groups. We would like to ask that you limit your statement to 4 to 5 minutes. For Africa, please raise your hand. Africa. We have one. The next one. Gulab.
Sénégal. Au nord de l'Afrique.
Africa.
Madam President, distinguished delegates, the Republic of Senegal is making this statement on behalf of the Africa region, considering the situation in which we find ourselves for an ambitious framework for biodiversity and to define appropriate responses to the challenges that we face, in particular the challenge relating to the financing, realistic financing of the conservation of biodiversity. Africa would like to greet Switzerland and express its thanks to the people and the government of Switzerland for having agreed to host this important meeting and for which and showing the response, the hospitality to various delegations. Switzerland accepted in good faith the formal meetings on the World Framework on Biodiversity, in spite of the fact that it had significant reservations about our capacity, our ability to participate effectively in order to maintain the impetus. Africa welcomes the continuation of face-to-face meetings, which is a guarantee for the formalization of the parties, whilst recognizing and appreciating the efforts made by the parties during the online work of SBI-3 and the 24th meeting of SBSTA and the open-ended working group. Madam President, Africa reiterates the fact that it is in favor of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which is ambitious and balanced, with all of the ambitions, with appropriate plans for transfer of technology, for example, mobilization of resources, development of capacity, financing, and a viable agreement on the way in which one can share the advantages of the digital sequence information in an equitable way. During the course of this meeting, we think it's crucial to agree on the content of the global framework for biodiversity. However, we will have to stress the mechanisms for the implementation in order to be able to be more realistic as we move towards 2030 and the 2050 vision. Africa would like to express the wish, through me, that this session will be an opportunity for very important discussions, just equitable discussions, to make it possible to attain constructive results in order to be able to live in harmony with nature. And I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Next speaker for GRULAC, Argentina. Please raise your hand. You have the floor for a maximum of 4 to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. This statement is made on behalf of the Latin American and the Caribbean countries. First of all, I would like to thank you, the Secretariat and the Swiss government, for their work in the organization of this third meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group, 24th meeting of SBSTA, and third meeting of SBI. Geneva brings us together to continue our deliberations towards the adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework at the UN Biodiversity Conference in Kunming, China. In this sense, political will, inclusive policy making, and consensus building are of fundamental importance. 2 years have passed since we have last met in Rome. The challenges before us, including new ones, have become exacerbated coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Nature is still declining, and we need to finalize our work to arrive at the COP with a good package of decisions that sets the world on a path to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. In this regard, we expect this meeting to make significant progress on several core COP decisions related to the Global Biodiversity Framework. In particular, we need to take advantage of time to reach an agreement on the following: the structure, goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework, the means of implementation, including the significant increase of finance provision, capacity building and technology transfer, a realistic mechanism for implementation and review, as well as monitoring arrangements, and the access and benefit sharing arising out of the use of genetic resources, including digital sequence information. Distinguished delegates, we would like to highlight that even though the adoption of the GBF is delayed, Latin America and the Caribbean countries continue to strive for the conservation and sustainable use of its rich biodiversity and culture in the long term, increasing the protection of our terrestrial, freshwater, and marine areas, undertaking sustainable use programs, and promoting the participation of all relevant stakeholders, including indigenous peoples and local communities, women, youth, civil society, academia, the private and financial sectors, as well as subnational and local governments. We celebrate the increasing broad support of world leaders to environmental issues, and we underline the high-level commitment of our region with this negotiation, with several heads of state and ministers from GRULAC attending virtually the pre-COP on biodiversity organized in Colombia and the first part of COP15 held in October 2021 in Kunming, China. The weeks ahead are critical to contribute to the success of the upcoming second part of COP15. GRULAC parties have come to Geneva, eager to engage with all regions and all stakeholders in a constructive and flexible spirit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, GRULAC Argentina. Next speaker is for EU, France. Please raise your hand, EU. You have the floor, please.
Merci beaucoup.
I thank you very much. Dear Chair of the 15th Conference of the Parties, Ms. Executive Secretary, co-chairs, distinguished delegates, the European Union and the member states are glad that after Rome we can now meet again to continue our vital work for the planet and the people. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have made every effort in order to mobilize our work for the humanity. We are grateful to the government and the people of Switzerland for the hospitality given to this resumed session. Preliminarily, the European Union and its member states condemn in no ambiguous terms the unjustifiable aggression by Russia of Ukraine, which is a serious breach of the international law and the UN Charter, and which undermines the stability of Europe and the world. We call on Russia to stop its military aggression and withdraw its military forces and equipment from the territory of Ukraine without any delay and without any preconditions, to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. And we express our solidarity with the people and the government of Ukraine. In this context, multilateralism remains crucial in order to meet global challenges. We can this way attain ambitious goals in order to improve on biodiversity in our decisions and our work here in Geneva. We thank the receiving country, the co-chairs and the chairs, as well as the Secretariat for the organization of this meeting and the work that was conducted last year. And we would like that this work continues until we hold the COP. Taking into account the statements made by the parties and others, would like to express the following priorities. The global biodiversity framework must be ambitious and relate to the three main objectives of the Convention. In particular, we're in favor of the objectives and indicators that would be objective, and these must reflect the growing importance of biodiversity for the challenge of the climate change. And during this special session of the UN General Assembly on the climate change, a resolution was passed according to put an end to the plastic pollution in accordance with the goals 2024. We are in favor of adopting operational objectives to decrease the charge on the excessive fisheries, to establish conditions that would be good for the environment. We have to uphold or focus on the coastal and marine environment. We have to protect, to reach the goal of protecting 30% of the marine and coastal areas. In order to draw lessons from our experience, we must have improved mechanisms in order to have transparent and effective action. The national plans of action for biodiversity, which would be supported by goals and standardized reporting, as well as making a global balance, these are goals that we must achieve. The key indicators must be adopted at the COP15. We believe that biodiversity must be integrated in all public political decisions by the sectors, investment decisions, and society at large. All public and private policies must be in line with the global framework. We also recognize the need to mobilize ambitious global resources. We have collectively the capacity to mobilize resources for biodiversity, and this mobilization must come from all sources, international, national, public, and private. The negative subsidies must be eliminated. We will need to mobilize other means to develop capacity for everybody. All these goals would be crucial to mobilize resources. The indigenous peoples and local communities have an important role to play in this. The intergenerational communication and the promotion of action by women are crucial. We must work together under the global framework to achieve the third major objective. We must integrate innovation, must be employed. The European Union, among others, will contribute with its priorities and will commit to a coherent approach between the convention and the subsidiary bodies, and we hope that we can achieve a constructive result with the participation of all the interested parties in Kunming this year in China. Thank you.
Thank you, France. Now for Jaskans, New Zealand. Please raise your hand. Jaskans, you have the floor for a maximum of 4 to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. New Zealand is speaking also on behalf of Australia, Canada, Iceland, Israel, Japan, Monaco, Norway, the Republic of Korea, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the United States as members of the JustCans group. We would like to register our appreciation to the Government of Switzerland and the CBD Secretariat for hosting and organising this meeting in challenging circumstances. We thank our co-chairs, chairs of the subsidiary bodies, and the Secretariat for their preparatory work, as well as the many contributions in various forms by parties, Indigenous peoples and local communities, biodiversity-related conventions, other relevant multilateral agreements, and stakeholders. We thank the Presidency, the Government of China, for its leadership. It is important that we continue to work constructively towards agreeing a new post-2020 global biodiversity framework, given the delays we had faced due to the COVID pandemic. Much work remains to be done over the coming 2 weeks. We will need to be efficient in our working methods, taking account of the challenges faced by small delegations and maximising the time made available for negotiations on elements directly related to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Some of the work of SBSTA and SBI is key to ensuring a robust scientific basis for the framework and to ensuring it can be implemented and global progress measured. The first draft of the framework, alongside the numerous views shared during the virtual sessions, are a good basis for our discussions in the open-ended working group. We must seize this valuable opportunity to work together in person towards our collective goal of an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework at COP15 Part 2. This includes a clear and concise framework building upon our collective Aichi commitments with a strengthened system for planning, reporting and review, and ambitious and measurable targets, all of which strive to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. We need to build not only on our past meetings, including COP15 Part 1, but also on COP26 and on the recent UN Environment Assembly. JustCans will bring a sense of ambition, prioritisation, and a willingness to identify creative solutions to the table in Geneva, and we look forward to working with others in this spirit. We believe this will be key to setting ourselves up for success in Kunming. We look forward to a productive meeting and fruitful discussions with all those with a stake in the outcome: parties, non-parties, Indigenous peoples and local communities, biodiversity-related conventions, other relevant multilateral agreements, and stakeholders. Madam President, we are deeply concerned to see the reports of mounting casualties and widespread damage, including ongoing environmental degradation and transboundary harm, caused by the unprovoked and illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine. Our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine impacted by this conflict. This military attack is a serious violation of international law, including the UN Charter. Russia's actions violate the prohibition of the use of force and the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine as enshrined in international law. We call again on Russia to act consistently with its international obligations, cease all hostilities in Ukraine, withdraw its troops, and engage in diplomatic negotiations as a pathway to resolve this conflict. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, JustCans New Zealand. Next speaker for Asia and the Pacific, Kuwait. Please raise your hand. Asia and the Pacific, Kuwait. You have the floor, please.
شكرا سيد الرئيس سيدتي الرئيسة على إتاحة الفرصة لدولة الكويت.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for giving us the possibility of making this statement at the opening of our plenary, which brings together the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the GBF, the SBSTTA, and the SBI. As regards Asia and the Pacific, we would like to express our appreciation, deep appreciation to Switzerland, host country, and the staff of the Secretariat of the CBD, and all of those who have been involved in the organization of this meeting, expressing the hope that it will be successful and that our debates especially will be successful. We have awaited these debates for a very long time, and we hope that they will be commensurate with our hopes and ambitions. Madam President, we're extremely pleased to be in this meeting, but we face a number of challenges, I must say. First of all, we're extremely pleased to be face-to-face with our colleagues and friends after 2 years of working remotely through virtual means as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We can presently speak directly without, instead of looking at pictures on screens. We must take into account the new threats to the environment and to our lives and to biological diversity as a result of the recent events. We welcome the achievements that have been made in the earlier period, and we must continue our efforts to review our objectives, formulate new goals, and examine the global issues such as the post-2020 framework and issues such as the synthetic biology and everything which involves the assessment of risk associated with modified living organisms, marine and coastal biodiversity and health, biodiversity and agriculture, among others. We must work with a spirit of cooperation and collaboration in the context of and about these different conventions on the environment and biodiversity in order to preserve the global the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We must ensure the monitoring, the reporting, and we must be aware of everything that is being done in terms of the implementation of the convention and the biodiversity strategy since 2011 and all the way up to 2020. In order to be able to discuss with all of the elements at hand in terms of the implementation of the convention in a clear and accurate way, there are other issues that we are going to be tackling and which might well have an effect on the implementation, such as the strengthening of capacities, capacity building, transfer of technology and knowledge, among others. So the cooperation with other organizations and other conventions will be important in order to ensure a follow-up and an assessment or evaluation of the implementation appropriately. We must see to the fact that all conventions do guarantee reports that will be presented and we can follow their implementation, and we must integrate the objectives or goals of biological diversity in all areas, regardless of the sector, in a strategic way. Asia Pacific, this region is extremely enthusiastic, and we have come here full of aspirations and ambitions within the framework of the post-2020 GBF. We're going to prepare the second part of COP15 for Asia and the Pacific in that region, because we have had to postpone this meeting several times as a result of the pandemic. The COP is crucially important because it will adopt the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Therefore, we have to discuss in depth this issue during our meeting now, here and now. And we are picking ourselves up in the world after the pandemic, more aware of how vulnerable our world is, how vulnerable our nature and diversity are. Madam President, the Asia-Pacific region is convinced that thanks and through our common work and our cooperation, pooling our efforts with other regions, we will be able to achieve our objectives and have a better future for biological diversity. And we hope that the meeting will meet its goals in a successful way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kuwait. Ladies and gentlemen, now we see two requests from the floor. So now the next speaker is Ukraine. Please limit your statement to maximum 3 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, we would like to express our appreciation to the Presidency, the Government of China, for leadership in guiding us in our work. We appreciate the hard work of the Secretariat enabling our meeting in Geneva. And we would like to assure you in Ukraine's full support and cooperation. We also appreciate the possibility to speak before this esteemed audience. Madam President, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, today is the 19th day of the full-scale, unprovoked and unjustified war launched by Russia against Ukraine, against Europe and the whole world. It's the most horrible and large-scale invasion since the Second World War. Russia launches horrific missile attacks on residential areas, attacks with aviation, tanks and artillery, sends subversion and reconnaissance groups. Russia destroys Ukrainian cities, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Mariupol, Ochtyrka, Hostomel, Irpin, Bucha, and many other smaller towns and villages. Russia keeps attacking kindergartens and orphanages. Last week, Russian bombs have destroyed a children's and maternity hospital in Mariupol. The overall death toll in just this Ukrainian city alone is 2,187 civilian citizens. Yesterday, when our bureau met to discuss logistical arrangements of the meeting, the Russian forces bombed and destroyed the International Peacekeeping Center in the city of Yavoriv, just 20 kilometers from the border with Poland. As a result of this attack, 35 staff members of the facility have lost their lives. Distinguished delegates, Russia's ongoing attack on Ukraine is also an attack on the environment. As a result of the foreign invasion, our natural heritage is being progressively damaged. In recent days, several fuel depots and gas lines were bombed by the Russian military, causing environmental emergencies and placing the health of nearby communities and ecosystems in danger. Russian attacks on munition depots have already led to the dispersal of military origin heavy metals and toxic hazardous materials, posing additional human health and environmental risk. Russian barbaric invaders destroyed the natural habitats, the source of biodiversity. It will take many years to restore the natural habitat, including for the rare and endangered species. As of today, more than half of the Ramsar sites in Ukraine have been affected by the hostilities committed by the Russian armed forces. That includes the sites located at the coast of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, as well as lower part of the Dnipro and Danube rivers. The Russian armed forces do not show any respect for the wild nature. Besides, they occupied since 2014 Ramsar sites Kriva Zatoka and Kriva Kosa in Donbass and the water coastal complex of Cape Apuk in Crimea have been extensively used for military exercises. More than 20 nature and biosphere reserves and national parks have suffered losses due to the Russian aggression. According to preliminary calculation, as of 1st March 2022, the aggressor was conducting military operations on the territory of 900 objects of the Nature Reserve Fund with an area of 12,400 square kilometers, which is about a third of the area of the Nature Reserve Fund in Ukraine. About 200 territories of the Emerald Network with an area of 2.9 million hectares are under threat of destruction. Moreover, Russia is trying to seize control of the Ukrainian nuclear power plants, including the largest one in Europe, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and threatens the world with the nuclear weapons. Since the Russian troops captured the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, there has been no more international control over the shelter and destroyed NPP unit. In the hands of aggressor, significant amount of nuclear waste could turn into a nuclear bomb, which will turn thousands of hectares into a dead, lifeless desert. Distinguished delegates, a full-scale invasion in Ukraine by the Russian Federation is a flagrant violation of the UN Charter, international law, human rights, environmental and nuclear safety and security, and the global peace. Actions of the Russian Federation pose existential threat to the world and bring unprecedented and long-lasting challenges to environment and human habitat. Russia's barbaric actions and nuclear terrorism in Ukraine puts the whole world at risk of an environmental catastrophe. International community must act now to address the environmental consequences of Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine. The adoption by the UN General Assembly of the resolution aggression against Ukraine, with the overwhelming support of the UN member states, which clearly demands that the Russian Federation immediately cease its use of force against Ukraine and refrain from any further unlawful threat or use of force against any UN member state, is a clear proof that we can be united in the face of this unprecedented challenge. We should continue our joint fight on all fronts, diplomatic, military, economic, legal ones, as well as at the environmental fora, including this one, with a view to putting an end to the aggression so that the whole world could feel safer. I thank you, Madam Chair, and I request this statement be treated as an official document of the meeting.
Now, the next speaker is from Russia. Please limit your statement to maximum 3 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Russian Federation would like to use its right to reply in connection with the statements made by a number of delegations, including the European Union, the countries of NZ, and Ukraine. We resolutely reject the accusations launched against us as false and irrelevant to the substance of the issues that are being considered under the CBD. The CBD mandate adopted in order to assure conservation and sustainable use of diversity in its resources do not include war and peace issues. We launch our call to abstain from politicizing this format. That's why we'll reply just once and briefly. On the basis of Article 51 of the UN Charter, Russia is implementing its right to self-defense and is carrying out a special military operation in Ukraine, and Russian Federation has notified the UN Security Council accordingly. By its action in Ukraine, Russia not just protects itself from the Nazi threat, but also reestablishes the effect of the goals and principles of the UN Charter in the territory of Donbass in Ukraine, thus assuring the implementation of the main goal of the World Organization, namely the prevention of a new world war. This operation is aiming at putting an end to the quite frank terror and war that was launched by Kiev against the inhabitants of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics that have been on for 8 years and took the lives of 13,000 civilians who did not recognize the anti-constitutional coup d'etat in Kiev in 2014. Our operation in the neighboring country is aimed at demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, at making it a neutral, peaceful state. The detailed information of the special operation have been fully covered by daily briefings of the Ministry of Defense in Russia, and this information is accessible at the website of this ministry. The Russian Federation has been consistent in upholding the CBD as the main international legal instrument for cooperation in the area of biodiversity. We have taken a constructive part in the development of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We confirm our commitment to a depoliticized interaction with all interested delegations. However, continued anti-Russian rhetoric can result in unjustifiable delays in this negotiating process, and the responsibility for this would be fully that of the initiators of this undermining campaign against the CBD and the people of our planet. And our statements will be posted, and we are categorically against, rotundly, resolutely against the posting of the Ukraine statement as an official document of this conference.
Distinguished delegates, we now hear opening statements covering all three bodies from major stakeholder groups. We would ask that you limit your statements to 3 minutes. I would now like to open the floor for interventions by representatives of the major groups of stakeholders. Each statement should not exceed 3 minutes. On behalf of IPLCs, please raise your hand. Please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. All goals, I'm speaking on behalf of the IAFB, all goals, targets and indicators of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework must uphold the minimum standards as agreed in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We call for enhancing the relational values between peoples and nature, and that the implementation of the framework be guided by human rights-based approach, and ensure the protection of defenders of environmental rights and indigenous peoples' rights. IAFB makes the following proposals. On conservation, IAFB suggests that traditional governance practices and plans of indigenous peoples must be reflected in spatial planning. Our free, prior and informed consent must be included in Target 3 and support our efforts for restoration and conservation. On customary sustainable use, both Targets 5 and 9 should be maintained. Respect to customary law and sustainable use must be respected, and the implementation of the Global Plan of Action on Customary Sustainable Use should be ensured. On knowledge, IAFB maintains the respect for FPIC and that our knowledge should guide culturally appropriate sustainable development. On participation, IAFB affirms Target 21 as is, the full and effective and equitable participation and respect of the rights over lands, territories and resources. On benefit sharing, IAFB suggests broadening the sources of benefit sharing to biological resources, ecosystem services and DSI. The GBF and COP15 decisions must recognize that DSI is developed from the utilization of genetic resources and traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, which are covered under Nagoya Protocol. The proposed monitoring framework and set of indicators is weak in recognizing and supporting the contributions of IPLCs. There are no IPLC-related headline indicators in goals and milestones. For targets, there are 4 proposed headline indicators related to only 3 targets. IAFB also calls for the recognition and support for community-based monitoring and information systems to complement the monitoring of the framework. In closing, IAFB makes proposals for additional relevant indicators as an annex, reflecting that Mother Earth is a living, integrated social ecological system. All life is co-evolutionary and interdependent, enhancing our mutual and reciprocal well-being. Thank you, Chair.
Before the next speaker, I would like to ask that please also upload your statement in advance, if possible, to all the speakers. Thank you. On behalf of women's organization, we'll hear from a representative from FAN. Please raise your hand. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm making this statement on behalf of the Women's Caucus. We would like to pay tribute to colleagues who are missing at this meeting due to the pandemic and all victims of war and violence, especially women and girls. We need peace, justice, and a healthy, safe, and sustainable environment for a better future for all. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to provide inputs into your discussions that will impact all of futures. Respect and promotion of women's rights and human rights generally are the heart of the CBD and should be effectively and duly translated into the goals, targets, and monitoring implementation framework of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We need a strong gender-responsive implementation of the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action. The capacity building strategy, review, planning, and reporting mechanisms are to be anchored and aligned with the deliverables of the post-2020 Gender Plan of Actions through gender-responsive implementation of the whole of the GBF, including gender-responsive indicators. We shall learn from the gaps in the implementation of the GBA and the Aicha targets from the past. We support the GBF guiding principle and a strengthened text for Target 21, but they are not sufficient to ensure integration of gender equality and justice and secure full and effective participation of women and girls and ensure their rights to equitable access and benefits from conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. The post-2020 GBF requires a standalone target on gender equality. The time is now. The biggest drivers of biodiversity loss include monocultures, unsustainable livestock farming, and other extractive industries, as well as indirect drivers, which have had a diverse impact on women globally. As industrial incentive agriculture, livestock farming, and large-scale fisheries are recognized among the main drivers of biodiversity loss, action is also needed to reverse the trends as soon as possible. For millennia, indigenous fisher women, peasant women have been the custodians and protectors of the world's biodiversity, of the traditional and ancestral knowledge intrinsic to it, the consequences of which can be seen in the loss of biodiversity. Governments have a plenary mandate to put in place strong, rights-based, gender-just, and equitable regulatory frameworks to halt destructive business activities. Businesses cannot be asked to self-regulate as currently suggested in the draft GBF Target 15. Gender-just and equitable governance and a recognition of the importance of gender-just community conservation, indigenous peoples, and other forms of collective actions should be included in all area-related targets. In closing, we also appeal for a gender-responsive financing mechanism and resource mobilization. We envision a world that is inclusive, just, kind, and nurturing, and the only way forward is recognizing and acknowledging the injustices we have created in the world today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. On behalf of Youth, Global Youth Biodiversity Network, you have the floor, please. Youth, Global Youth Biodiversity Network.
Thank you, President. Dear delegates, it is sometimes hard for us, youth, to keep fighting for biodiversity when every new scientific report shows that the situation is only getting worse. However, after over 10 years, Even when most of the Aichi targets were not achieved, we still believe that the Convention on Biological Diversity has a key role to play in achieving the goal of living in harmony with nature, and we are still here to make global youth priorities heard: intergenerational equity, transformative education, and right-based approaches. I'm sure you've heard of them by now. After conducting consultations with youth from 113 countries, we identified intergenerational equity as a key element to reach the future we want and ensure the meaningful engagement of children and youth in decision-making processes at all levels. This principle, as the foundation of sustainable development, is explicitly mentioned in the Paris Agreement preamble, recognized in environmental and international law, and protected in at least 63 national constitutions. We propose to reinsert it into the enabling conditions and reflect it in elements such as Goal B, Target 11, and Target 21. A second youth priority is transformative education, which we define as diverse approaches to formal, non-formal, and informal education that foster generations capable of stewarding society towards a sustainable, peaceful, and equitable future in harmony with nature. We need to transform our mindsets, which is why we would like to see transformative education as a standalone target in the post-2020 GBF, or at the very least integrated into Target 16, 20, and Section K. We can't keep working on this framework if we do not take rights-based approaches for people and nature into account. During these 2 weeks of negotiations and beyond, we would like you to ask yourselves, who does this text benefit? This is the third priority we want strengthened in the GBF, adding explicit references in paragraphs 12 and 3 by including the rights of nature in the enabling conditions and incorporating language aligned with existing agreements such as the Escazú Agreement and the Aarhus Convention in Target 21. While we demand that parties agree on an ambitious strategy, we would like to stress that the means of implementation should be sufficient to achieve the proposed targets. This includes making sufficient funds available and directly accessible to youth, women, indigenous peoples, and local communities. It also means creating pathways for meaningful participation of marginalized stakeholders in the design, implementation, measuring, and reporting efforts. Our future is at stake. We can't afford to hear the same broken promises, the same too little too late solutions, the same conversations in silos, the same business as usual. We need to stop the same and to aim for real systemic transformative change. We need to stop the same and to think with an intersectional lens to guarantee rights for every form of life on Earth, including future generations. Thank you, President.
Thank you. On behalf of the CBD Alliance, Friends of the Earth International, please raise your hand. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Rita Owaka. I read this statement on behalf of the CBD Alliance. Chair, first we want to express our solidarity with all victims of wars and conflicts, present and past. Wars destroy human lives, well-being, and biodiversity. We quote from the CBD preamble, noting that ultimately the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity will strengthen friendly relations among states and contribute to peace for humankind. Second, we wish to express our concerns on the following. The current GBF draft does not address any of the current drivers of biodiversity loss: ever-increasing economic growth, excessive consumption levels, unsustainable production, corporate capture, and blind faith in technology to fix our problems. Instead, there is great emphasis on false solutions through, for example, the nature-based solutions, NBS, dangerously vague, all too easily abused and applied to approaches that are destructive of biodiversity. Added to this, Mr. Chair, The draft mainstreaming decision that asked us to accept the long-term approach to mainstreaming was elaborated in an undemocratic way by a small, unbalanced group and leads to more power and control by corporations with no government regulation at all. We also express our concern on any proposal to remove all cross-cutting issues and place them in a mere guidance section. Third, we believe the following aspects should be at the center of the debate in the coming weeks. Sorry, Mr. Chair. The rights to land and resources of indigenous peoples and local communities with their full, free, prior, and informed consent, the right to a healthy environment, all human rights, and protection of AHRD must be at the heart of the GBF. We also call for inclusive language to recognize the vital rights and roles of small-scale food producers and of agroecological food production, currently nowhere in the GBF. We need commitment to mobilization of resources for and in direct support of IPLCs, women, and youth. Improving and securing conditions for equitable governance of biodiversity should be adequately addressed, including in area-based measures and related targets, as well as in targets on drivers of biodiversity loss, finance, and other enabling conditions. Benefit sharing should include research outcomes and related knowledge and cannot be limited to commercial products. We call for a ban on deep-sea mining. Governance of conserved areas must be equitable, gender just, and effective with the participation of all rights holders and the full respect of all human rights. Indigenous territories and community conserved areas clearly play a crucial part in preserving biodiversity, as shown in the IPBES Global Assessment. Implementation of an obligation for parties to the CBD, not an option. A whole of government approach, harmonized MBSAPs and national reports, and a constructive collaborative peer review mechanism are key elements for this. Financial and technical resources to help southern countries need to be upscaled considerably on top of the elimination and repurposing of all harmful incentives for biodiversity. Improved and secured conditions of equitable and gender-just governance are required, as well as a standalone target on gender. Chair, parties in Geneva have a great responsibility to decide on a framework that effectively addresses the drivers of biodiversity loss, holds duty bearers accountable, and secures the conditions for recognition and engagement of all actors, especially IPLC, women, youth, and small-scale food producers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. On behalf of a group of non-governmental organizations, World Wildlife Fund, please raise your hand. You have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of 7 international NGOs, namely WWF, BirdLife, CI, TNC, WCS, RSPB, and IFO, and in alignment with additional 14 international environmental organizations and sustainable business platform, which will be listed in the written submission of this intervention. We're here committed to a vision of living in harmony with nature. This requires peace as a foundation for sustainable development, and we stand in solidarity to all people affected by conflict worldwide. Nature is in crisis, placing human and planetary health at risk, and parties gathering here in Geneva must signal a turning point and drastically increase the ambition reflected in the Global Biodiversity Framework. We are concerned by the ambition gaps still remaining in the framework regarding the just transformation of the sectors driving biodiversity loss, and fueling humanity's unsustainable environmental footprint, including our food systems, and regarding the integration of a right-based approach. Nothing less than an overall ambition to reverse the loss of nature and achieve a nature-positive world by 2030 will suffice to meet the tremendous challenges we face. We highlight also 4 specific recommendations. First, we believe that the 2030 mission must be made more ambitious by explicitly seeking a nature-positive world, where biodiversity loss is both halted and reversed this decade so that there will be more nature in 2030 than there is now, with clear metrics to track progress. We're particularly concerned about the footnote 8 in draft 1, which could imply incorrectly that stabilizing a rate of loss by 2030 is sufficient. It is definitely not sufficient. Second, a global target on protecting and conserving at least 30% of land and marine habitats, focusing on key areas for biodiversity, and as a critical element of broader efforts to retain, conserve, and restore global ecosystem integrity, should be a cornerstone of this nature-positive global goal. The target must be achieved through indigenous people, local communities leadership, while respecting and securing indigenous tenure and rights to free and prior and informed consent. Third, we appreciate quantification of targets 18 and 19 in the recognition of the need to close the biodiversity finance gap from both directions, reducing need and increasing flows. We stress that all harmful incentives and subsidies must be eliminated or repurposed, that any positive financial flows must be additional to current flows, and that the framework must specifically require the financial sector to align all public and private flows with the goals of the framework. We believe that a target figure of at least $60 billion annually of international public finance for biodiversity to developing countries would appropriately reflect the responsibility of developed countries. Fourth, the draft text on responsibility and transparency needs to be significantly strengthened to ensure that the implementation mechanism is anchored as a critical and inseparable component of the framework and agreed at COP15. Section J must provide more details of the main components of the strengthened implementation mechanism, including planning, reporting, monitoring, reviewing, and ratcheting. Finally, a draft text is notably silent on the devastating COVID-19 pandemic we're still in the midst of. The framework must include all elements required to help prevent future pandemics and epidemics from zoonotic origin at source, including wildlife use, trade and markets, and other causes and drivers of pathogenic spillovers. This is critical for all 3 objectives of the CBD. Madam Chair and distinguished delegates, let's work together to deliver an historic GBF able to reverse nature loss by 2030 and deliver a nature-positive future as a key pillar to secure a safe future for all of us and all life on Earth. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. On behalf of subnational and local governments, please raise your hand. Okay, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame.
I thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates. I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Consultative Committee coordinated by of subnational and regional governments coordinated by the Quebec government. All the partners are taking part in the process from the start. We would like here to refer to the 3 meetings for the preparation of this session. We welcome the inclusion of our group in the global efforts. Our group can contribute and will contribute to achieving the global biodiversity framework. Would like to stress our contribution to the glossary so that all our concerns are well understood. This must include the vertical integration and the horizontal integration at the level of our government. We're also asking for the reintegration of nature-based solutions in the next global biodiversity framework. We adopted a definition of what is based on nature so that it is included. This definition requires that the nature-based decisions could have considerable advantages for the conservation of biodiversity and the human beings. This definition could limit the possible negative consequences for biodiversity. Secondly, we ask the parties to officially adopt the document CRP8 for the subnational and other local governments to be integrated in the new global framework. The previous version during the COP must be taken into account. Local and subnational governments have been already taking their decisions in favor of biodiversity on the basis of their priorities. This would lead to actual action and would contribute to the achievement of national and international objectives and establish a more specific and systemic approach on the basis of the platform City for Nature. And document 46 is calling for the parties to adopt in Geneva a new document in this area. To conclude, here in Geneva, we can and must have an ambitious goal, and this is important. Don't forget that the implementation of all our decisions here will need to pass through us in the legislatures. Let's work together if we want to succeed. The all-government approach must now be more than words and be implemented in specific action and real cooperation. And we're impatient to cooperate with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of business organization, the Finance for Biodiversity and the Business for Nature coalitions, please raise your hand. Okay. Please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. My name is Marcelo Bear. I am the Vice President of Sustainability and Group Affairs at Natura & Co., a Brazilian headquartered multinational cosmetic company. I am making this joint statement on behalf of the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation and the Business for Nature Coalition, who includes partners like the International Chamber of Commerce, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and the World Economic Forum. Business and finance leaders know our economy relies on nature. To act on nature, we need an enabling policy environment that supports us in making risks and increasing opportunities. The post-2020 framework needs to highlight our role as business and financial institutions more clearly. We are concerned that the overall ambition and sense of urgency on Draft 1 is not strong enough to halt and revert nature laws by 2030 and create a nature-positive economy. No one is saying it's going to be easy, but we need to act now, collectively, and give it everything we have. We are calling parties to do 3 things. First, strengthen Goal D by committing to align all financial flows, public and private, with the goals and targets. This means eliminating and redirecting all harmful flows and increasing resources for positive activities. Second, strengthen Target 15, firstly by committing to adopt mandatory requirements for business to assess and disclose their impacts and dependencies on nature. Secondly, by incentivizing all businesses to avoid all direct negative impacts at operational level and reduce by halving direct negative impacts in value chains. Third, raise the ambition on Target 18, leveraging the latest research estimating environmentally harmful subsidies to be at least $1.8 trillion per year. Priority should be to ensure these financial resources are directed to incentivize positive actions, while ensuring a just and fair transition for all people and local communities. We stand ready to work together with parties to deliver a truly transformative framework. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. On behalf of academic and research organization, the University of Cambridge Conservation Leadership Alumni Network, please raise your hand. Okay, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Esteemed delegates, my name is Daniel Flinley, representing institutions including the University of Cambridge CLAN, a network of over 200 conservation leaders from 85 countries. Our request is that you bear in mind 3 evidence-based points during the resumed session. Acknowledgement, action, and accountability. We must acknowledge all drivers of biodiversity loss. This should lead us to empower stakeholders and champions, recognizing good leadership, collective crisis leadership, as a critical component of success. We must act with utmost urgency to stop extinction. To do this, we need to restructure policy tools, including subsidies and taxes, leaving no one behind. Together, we can evolve from a GDP-driven economy to one that truly reflects human and planetary well-being. And we must establish accountability mechanisms. How? By being transparent, taking care to communicate well with each other, and agreeing stepping stones for progress and impact. Rapid and long-lasting impact. So please acknowledge, act, and be accountable as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of biodiversity-related conventions, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, please raise your hand. It's okay, so you have the floor. Thank you.
Microphone to 757, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished delegates, it's an honor for me to deliver this statement on behalf of the licensed group of biodiversity-related conventions, known as BLG. We join others in thanking the government of Switzerland for hosting these 3 meetings and commend the CBD Secretariat for the preparatory work it had undertaken to organize the meetings, despite the challenging times we are still going through. As the 8th Global Conventions addressing biodiversity, we have been deeply engaged in the preparations of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The BLG is composed of the heads of the secretariats of the CBD, CITES, CMS, the International Plant Protection Convention, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, the International Whaling Commission, Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, and the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. In the discussions about the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the BLG members have urged the mandates of our respective conventions the mandates of our conventions are woven into the framework to make full use of the actions undertaken under each convention and to recognize the important role that these conventions have in the implementation of the framework. The framework should also incorporate the data and indicators already in place within the BLGs for tracking progress, especially those that are also indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals. While important progress has been made to promote the synergies among our conventions, there is room for enhanced cooperation, in particular at the national level. The single most effective action that would enhance more coordinated national level implementation is to include text in the framework that calls for countries to reflect in their MBSAPs the commitments of the various biodiversity-related conventions to which they are parties. We therefore underscore the importance of involving the national focal points of the biodiversity-related conventions in the updating and alignment of MBSAPs and including objectives of the BLG conventions in those MBSAPs. It would also be important to reflect the need for cooperation by all the biodiversity-related conventions secretariats as part of the text of the framework or in the operational decision adopted by COP15. The BLG members stand ready to contribute within our own mandates, aligning our efforts wherever possible, and will be present throughout the meetings, contributing to their deliberations. Finally, we invite you to attend a dialogue that will be held on 17 March, lunchtime, at which the executive heads will be available to engage in discussions on how we can collaboratively meet and even exceed the new goals of the post-2020 framework. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Finally, I would like to give the floor to the Director General of IUCN, Mr. Bruno Obley. You have the floor, please.
Excellencies, friends, ladies and gentlemen, following UNEA, and as we near the launch of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, IUCN stresses that multilateralism works when political commitment, readiness to listen, and spirit of compromise drives it forward. We have an opportunity today to make this global framework fit for purpose and spur necessary and urgent action that halts the loss of biodiversity by 2030 and achieves recovery and restoration by 2050. We need a simple, streamlined framework where global goals, milestones, and targets connect seamlessly as are measurable, underpinned by science, and linked directly to explicit outcomes. Ladies and gentlemen, let's rally around the high ambition. Let's conserve at least 30% globally of our oceans and lands by 2030, recognizing indigenous and local community conserved territories. Let's restore degraded ecosystems guided by the principles of the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. Let's ramp up species conservation with a global species action plan. Let's advance nature-based solutions at scales guided by the IUCN NBS standard. And let's increase financial resources and international conservation finance flows to fund biodiversity action, leverage private finance, and improve domestic resource mobilization. Friends, we are near the finish line. Let us ensure together that by COP15, a transformative and successful post-2020 global biodiversity framework sees the light and leads to a world of living in harmony with nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all the speakers. Distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of our joint opening plenary. As a reminder, the SBSTTA plenary will convene immediately following the conclusion of this meeting. The WG2020 plenary will meet this afternoon, starting at 3:00 p.m. The SBI plenary will convene immediately upon the conclusion of the WG2020 plenary. Now I would like to give the floor to Secretariat, Mr. David Cooper.
Thank you very much, Madam President. If I could just request that all those delegates who took the floor to upload your statements, if you could, on the meeting webpage. You can do so under item 1 for any of the 3 meetings. And this would help us in keeping a record of the meeting. Thank you very much. And please stay in your seats because the SBSTTA plenary will begin very shortly. Thank you.
So this joint opening plenary is now adjourned. Thank you. Thank you all for the delegates.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Dear colleagues, please take your seats. We are about to start. I invite you to take your place. We start in a minute. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call the meeting to order. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to Geneva, Switzerland, and to declare this second part of the 24th meeting of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice. Colleagues and friends, I cannot tell you how happy it makes me to be here on this podium in the very same room as so many of you for our first in-person meeting in SBSTTA since November 2019 in Montreal. Since then, we have met virtually in a wide range of briefing, webinars, virtual workshops, online discussions, and informal consultations, including a virtual informal session of SBSTTA-24 in February 21, and the first formal session in May, June 2021. I counted them, and there were more than 70 sessions virtually. We finally are here. Colleagues, it was indeed a long, long road to get here. It has not been easy. We have all had to learn new ways to communicate with one another, but I trust that we have not forgotten the old ways. I count on and trust in your continued support for the smooth running of our deliberations. I wish to thank the Executive Secretary and her staff for the hard work and dedication in preparation for this meeting. I also wish to thank the members of SBSTTA Bureau for their unwavering support. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome Ms. Jijun Lee, the new Director of Science, Society, and Sustainable Futures Divisions of the CBD Secretariat. Many of you will remember Ms. Lee as the coordinator for the Marine and Coastal Biodiversity Program of Work of the CBD for 12 years. Ms. Lee subsequently spent 3 years as a director at the International Seabed Authority and now returns to take over the management of this division and therefore the secretaryship on this meeting. I am sure you will join me in congratulating her and in wishing her the very best of luck. Colleagues, I hope that you and your loved ones have kept well during these difficult times. I would like to express my solidarity to you and request that we support each other by remaining vigilant and respecting the COVID protocol in place for this meeting. Colleagues, this resumed session of SBSTTA is critical in advancing progress toward COP15. In particular, the discussions in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In parallel, and while awaiting the adoption of the framework, we should continue to leverage opportunities for synergies and accelerate our efforts to achieve the 2050 vision for biodiversity. One of such examples developed in the context of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is the Nature for Health Multi-Partner Trust Fund, which has been announced earlier this month on the occasion of the World Wildlife Day and UNEA 5.2, through an initial contribution of 50 million euros from the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protections via Germany's International Climate Initiative. The fund brings together leading UN agencies, intergovernmental organizations, and civil society groups in the field of environment and health, as reflect. Yes, this is precisely the type of partnership that will strengthen the ground for the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework with a view to putting together biodiversity on a path to recovery and building a sustainable and peaceful future for our people and our planet. Before we begin our deliberations, I wish to emphasize that in accordance to our mandate and the limited time available to us, we must concentrate on providing the best scientific, technical, and technological advice. I therefore ask you to set aside political consideration and leave this for the conference of the parties. I would very much appreciate your cooperation on this regard. I wish us a fruitful deliberations, and I look forward to working with all of you over the coming weeks. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to the election of officers. You will recall that during the first part of our formal session on 3 May, the subsidiary body was reminded that indeed to nominate new members to the Bureau to replace the outgoing members from Antigua and Barbuda, Finland, Laos, People's Democratic Republic, Mexico, Morocco, and Ukraine for a term commencing at the end of the 24th meeting and ending at the close of the 26th meeting. You were also reminded that depending on the outcome of those nominations, it might also be necessary to nominate substitute members of the Bureau that were also parties to the protocols of the Convention. During part 1 of our meeting, members of the Bureau were invited to coordinate with the respective regional groups to nominate new Bureau members and to ensure that selected candidates have the full support of the government and institutions to dedicate time and travel to represent your region in the SBSTA Bureau. Since SBSTA has been tasked also to serve the protocols, it is preferable if nominees to the SBSTA Bureau are from a party to all the 3 instruments. For example, the Convention, the Cartagena Protocol, and the Nagoya Protocol. Alternately, and as provide for the in-text of the protocols, if a nominee is from a country that is not party to one of the protocols, then the region should also nominate a substitute from a country that is party to the protocols. I propose that all regions work internally to provide nominations and indicate that we will return to this item at the next part of the meetings. I also understand that consultations are still ongoing. Therefore, to save time, I propose that we come back to this item at our final plenary session on 27 March. So please go ahead with your consultations and be ready with your nominees. In this case, colleagues, I also wish to remind you that my own term of office as SBSTA chair will end at the closing of COP15 in Kunming. Thus, at this next meeting, the Conference of the Parties will elect a new SBSTA chair. In line with established practice, this is expected to be based on nominations from the Central and Eastern Europe region, and the region has been advised accordingly. I also remind you that Ms. Senka Barutanovic of Bosnia and Herzegovina was elected as rapporteur for the meeting during the first part of this meeting on the basis of a recommendation by the Bureau. So we have Senka with us again. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to the adoption of the organization of work. Colleagues, you will recall that the agenda on document CBD-Live for the 24th meeting of the subsidiary body was adopted during the first part of its meeting. At the end of the first part of the meeting, the subsidiary body adopted a report that provides information on the status of work of each agenda item. For the resumed meeting of SBSTTA-24, I would like to refer you to the supplementary annotations to the agenda provided in document SBSTTA-24 1F3, prepared in consultation with the SBSTA Bureau. For our resumed meeting and its relationship to the resumed meetings of SBI and the Working Group 2023, the Executive Secretary, in consultation with the two Bureau, prepared a proposed organization of work which is provided in the annex to the joint scenario note in document SBSTTA-24 at 2 Ref 2. So you can see all the program. I would like to give some explanations on the proposed organization of SBSTTA-24 as outlined in this document. Colleagues, as you know, SBSTTA-24 first met in February 21 for an informal virtual session, through which we maintain our momentum and advance our work. We heard interventions on the pre-session documents for 6 out of the 8 items on the agenda. Participants focused their interventions on comments on the draft recommendations set out in the pre-session documents. There were no negotiations and no formal substantive outcomes or conference room papers stem from the meeting. We then meet virtually for the first part of SBSTA between 3 May and 9 June 2021. By the end of that session, during which all items of the agenda were addressed, 6 L documents and 3 CRP documents were prepared. Since then, 2 non-papers have also been prepared based on the first reading during the first part of the meeting. Please note that all of these L documents, CRPs, and non-papers are available on the meeting webpage under Plenary section. In view of the extraordinary circumstances prevailing due to the ongoing pandemic and the complexities involved in holding the meeting in a virtual setting, it was agreed that the finalization of the work and the recommendations of the subsidiary body will be deferred until a resumed session of the subsidiary body, to be held in person as indicated in the report of the first part of the meeting. Therefore, this is our job at this resumed session. I will now go through the documents for our consideration one by one in the order of the item number, right? Turning to item 3 of the agenda, 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook and its summary for policymakers. Document L2 was prepared for formal adoption by the subsidiary body. It is anticipated that this L document will be adopted by the plenary on 19 March. Also, under item 3 of the agenda, post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, scientific and technical information to support the review of the updated goals and targets and related indicators and baselines. A draft recommendation for consideration by COP15 was developed with the assistance of a contact group for formal adoption by the subsidiary body. This draft recommendation is contained in document L3. The draft recommendation contains a reference to the monitoring framework, which will be developed in one of 2 annexes to this document. The annex to contain the monitoring framework has yet to be produced. In light of the discussions during part 1 of SBSTA and the views expressed at part 1 to the 3rd meeting of the Working Group on Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, a revised note on the monitoring approach for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework was prepared and issued as a non-paper. I propose to reconvene the aforementioned contact group with a mandate to consider and further develop the monitoring approach provided in this non-paper. The outcome of this work is expected to be further considered in plenary and once approved, integrated as an annex to the draft recommendation contained in document L3, which will be submitted for formal adoption by the subsidiary body. This contact group will be co-led by Mr. Andrew Stott from the United Kingdom of the Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and Mr. Alfred Oteng-Jewa from Ghana, and will meet 5 times. Turning to item 4 of the agenda on synthetic biology, document L5 was prepared with the assistance of a contact group for formal adoption by the subsidiary body. Turning to item 5 of the agenda, risk assessment and risk management of living modified organisms, document L6 was prepared with the assistance of a contact group for formal adoption by the subsidiary body. It is anticipated that these 2L documents will be adopted by plenary on 25th March, while we have not allocated further time on plenary or contact groups on these items. I do encourage delegations to engage in informal consultations during the week with a view to removing brackets in the draft decisions where consensus can be found. Turning into item 6 of the agenda, marine and coastal biodiversity, there are 2 CRPs, CRP2 and CRP4. Document CRP4 reflects the work of the contact group I established during the first part of our meeting to focus on the annexes of the draft recommendations of ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, the EBSAs. It was agreed to defer consideration of the draft recommendations set out in document CRP4 to the resumed sessions of this meeting. Accordingly, I propose to reconvene the aforementioned contact group with a view to further consider and work on documents CRP2 and CRP4 for approval and eventual formal adoption by the subsidiary body. The recommendation on other matters was made available as document CRP2, Conservation and Sustainable Use of Marine and Coastal Biodiversity. This CRP will also be reviewed by the contact group on marine and coastal biodiversity. This contact group will be co-led by Ms. Mary May Musungale from Seychelles and Mr. Adam van Oppenzeeland from New Zealand. Its mandate will be to further consider and work on documents CRP2 and CRP4. Its first meeting will take place on Saturday, 19 March from 7:30 to 10:30 p.m. My intention is that both CRP documents will be considered by the plenary for approval tentatively on 24 March and for adoption by the subsidiary body as L documents tentatively for 25th March. Please be aware that consideration of marine documents by the contact group will take place next week in order to minimize overlap with the BBNG negotiations in New York and to provide the opportunities for those delegates to join us here in Geneva accordingly. Turning into item 7 of the agenda on biodiversity and agriculture, a draft recommendation for consideration by COP15 was prepared and it is contained in document L7. Due time constraints in part 1 of our meeting, the annex containing the draft action plan on the International Initiative for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Soil Biodiversity was not considered and remains completely in brackets. I propose, therefore, to convene a contact group to consider the annex of document L7 for further consideration at the plenary of 19 March and eventual adoption together with the associated draft recommendation contained in document L7, tentatively on 27 March. The contact group on item 7 will meet on Wednesday afternoon from 3 to 6 p.m. and will be co-led by Mr. Adams Toussaint from St. Lucia and Mr. Norbert Barlocher from Switzerland. Its mandate will be to discuss the annex containing the draft plan of action 2020-2030 for the International Initiative for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Soil Biodiversity. Turning to item 8 of the agenda, program of work of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. Document L4 was prepared for formal adoption by the subsidiary body. Again, I encourage delegations to engage in informal consultations during the week with a view to removing brackets in the draft decisions where consensus can be found for adoption on March 24. Please be aware that IPBES plenary IPBES 9 plenary is scheduled for the 3 to 9 of July this year. Turning to item 9 on biodiversity and health, kindly recall that the first reading of this agenda item took place during part 1 of SBSTA during the 8th plenary session on 8 June 2021. At the 9th plenary session on 9 June, I established a contact group to further discuss the issue when the subsidiary body next met in person. Based on intervention and submissions received, the Secretariat issued a non-paper to support further discussions in the contact group. At this meeting, the contact group is scheduled to meet twice, and its mandate will be to discuss the annex containing a global action plan for biodiversity and health, and if time allows, to also review the recommendation. The outcome of their work is expected to be reviewed by plenary as a CRP document on 19 March and submit for adoption as an L document on 24 March. This contact group will be co-led by Ms. Helena Jeffrey Brown from Antigua and Barbuda and Ms. Marina von Weisinger from Finland. It will meet tomorrow evening from 7:30 to 10:30 p.m. Turning to item 10 on invasive alien species. Document CRP7 reflects the outcome of discussions in the Friends of the Chair group, which had been tasked to find a way forward on the annexes in the draft recommendations prepared by the Chair. Document CRP7 will be further considered for approval during our next plenary on 24 March, and then produced as an L document for adoption in the subsidiary body later in this meeting. The aforementioned CRP and L documents will be taken up for approval and or adoption in our upcoming 4 plenaries. So we have 4 chances to approve everything. Colleagues, I am sure you will agree with me that we have an ambitious and challenging agenda before us. It is therefore very important to be as efficient as possible in discharging our work. Concerning the L documents, with the exceptions of document L7 on item 7, for which we will discuss the annex further in a contact group, and the proposed new annex on the monitoring framework, we will not allocate time in contact group to further consider the L documents. I hope this is clear. However, as I have already noted with respect with relevant agenda items, I wish to encourage parties to interact informally and engage with each other with a view to explore opportunities to make progress on outstanding issues and to present possible solutions for removal of the brackets, subject to the agreement among parties during the plenary when relevant L document is taken up for adoption. If the proposed solution is readily agreeable by the plenary at that time, we will integrate the proposed solutions into the L document. If, however, the proposed solutions engender significant discussions and many additional suggestions, we will leave the relevant paragraphs of the L document unchanged and send the document to the Conference of the Parties. Please note that the SBSTA Bureau, together with the COP Bureau, will keep the timetable of meetings under review in the light of progress, and therefore, please expect some flexibility in the organization of our work in the next weeks. With this explanation, I submit the organization work for approval. I see no objections. Then the program of work is approved. I would like to say a few words about the way that contact groups will operate during this meeting of SBSTA. Contact group sessions will last up to 3 hours. Up to 3 sessions of different groups can be scheduled per day. They will meet either from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., or from 7:30 to 10:30 p.m. local time in Geneva. No contact groups of either SBSTA or SBI will run in parallel with those of the Working Group on Post-2020. Up to 2 SBSTA and SBI contact groups in total can run in parallel. The contact groups are open to participation by all parties, other governments, and representatives of observers. The usual practice and rules will apply to participation of observers. They may speak at the discretion of the co-leads and given the floor after parties speak. Any substantive proposals from an observer must be supported by at least one party. Those are our rules. As per usual practice, these sessions cannot be recorded or shared through social media. Please, let's have discipline on this. The contact groups will work in English, and accordingly, non-papers considered at the meetings of the group are in English. As per usual practice, the outcomes of the work of the contact groups will be provided as CRP documents in all languages for consideration of the plenary. All meetings of SBSTA contact groups will take place in Hall D, which is the big one, the other side. Participants must sit in the designated space behind their name plate. Delegates are requested to limit the size of their delegations present in the room to no more than 2 per party and 1 per observer at any time. Thank you for your cooperation. Dear colleagues, it's now close to 1 p.m., and I would like to bring this session to a close for the day. We will next meet in plenary on Saturday, 19 March at 10 a.m., when we will consider CRP documents for Item 7, Biodiversity and Agriculture, Item 9, Health and Biodiversity, Item 10, Invasive Alien Species, as well as L document on GBO5 under Item 3. Until then, there will be no other meetings of the SBSTA plenary. Instead, the contact groups will meet accordingly to the agenda outlined earlier. This afternoon will be dedicated to the plenary sessions of SBI and the Working Group on Post-2020 Biodiversity Framework. Secretariat, do you have any announcements?
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, Secretariat wishes to bring your attention to the calendar of side events being organized every day during this meeting from 1:15 to 2:45 on a great many topics relevant to the agenda items. The calendar is available at www.cbd.int/side-events. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat, and thank you all for your cooperation. Dear delegates, the plenary meeting is adjourned. Have a nice and fruitful afternoon.